Hi, Julia.
Hi, Mom.
Are you ready to introduce our new podcast?
Yes, I'm so excited.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, so hello and welcome to our brand new adventure, the Book Snug podcast. This is a cozy conversational place where we're focusing on books and the reading life. My name is Julia.
And my name is Stephany.
And we're a mother and daughter team who love reading and talking about the books we're reading. Here on this podcast, you can expect bookish-related content every 2 weeks.
We're calling today's podcast the Prologue. It's setting the stage for what's to come. We'll be introducing ourselves, talking a bit about our hopes and dreams for this little show, and we'll give you a sneak peek into the format of the show and who we are as readers. Julia, do you want to introduce yourself first?
I totally can. My name is Julia. I will shortly be 26. I am an avid reader. I got that pretty honest. I have been reading my whole life. I have very vivid memories of reading to my younger brothers when I was, who knows how old I was. I professionally have a degree in psychology. I work with those with disabilities, so intellectual disabilities, low IQ, Down syndrome, things like that. And my nonfiction stuff tends to focus on that kind of side of questions and material. Fictionally, I will read anything and everything. My husband is not a reader. I've been married for just about 3 years. He's not a reader, but that's totally fine because it means there's more time for me to read while he's out doing his own stuff. But yeah, I'm really excited for this podcast, this adventure, and talking about books is just something I love to do, so I'm excited for wherever this goes.
Okay.
What about you, Mom?
I am married. I've been married for 30 years. I have 3 biological children and 2 children-in-law. I love them all very much. I love spending time with them. I am also an assistant professor at a local college. I recently stepped away from being a tenured full-time teacher to being an adjunct, and I find myself in the position of trying to decide what I want to do with myself when I grow up. So I'm in a season of change and transition right now, which is fine because it's actually giving me more time to read, so I'm not complaining. I have been surrounded by books my whole life, and I would not have it any other way. Julia, do you want to just explain a little bit how we got to this point of making a podcast that's focused pretty much solely on books and the reading life?
Yeah, definitely. This is definitely a process that I think got started super fast, but it took us a long time to get here. Trying to decide on the name alone, it took weeks.
Forever.
But I was definitely kind of the propeller of this idea.
The mastermind.
Yeah, the mastermind. I'll own that title. It was just kind of an idea that I had one day that I was just like, oh, this would be tons of fun. It was an idea that just felt right to do. And so I'm really excited for this. The amount of ideas that we have mapped out is just exciting, but also who knew that there was that much to talk about for books?
Well, but when we get together, we talk about books all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it just seemed like a natural progression to put it in a podcast and put it out there into the world.
Right. Right. And we're excited too because sometimes we might even have guests on, which is, I think, will just be a really fun way to include other people in those conversations, which we have already done, but to be able to have that opportunity and then to even be a part now of the bookish community online is, I think, will be a lot of fun too, to kind of even just put our own thoughts out there, maybe.
Meet other people and hear what they have to say about books. Yeah,
I think it's exciting. This maiden voyage is a little scary. I'm not scared, but there's like a level of what the heck are we doing?
Imposter syndrome. Yeah.
But I think I'm having a ton of fun, and I think that that's all that matters right now. So
it's a creative outlet.
Yeah, it is. It is.
The Book Snug podcast will drop every 2 weeks. We are hoping to have each podcast run between 30 and 40 minutes, and again, it will be completely bookish or reading life related content.
Yes, we're not doing like a book club podcast. We're not reading a book and talking about it. We're talking about different themes and different topics and doing different reading
genres.
tags.
Yeah. Asking questions, discussing books, but not in a formal capacity. It's going to be a very relaxed, very cozy, very informal and friendly environment.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we won't have some
spicy opinions. They'll be spicy
about some books, but we don't have any intention of being formal or highly intellectual.
No, absolutely. This is we're just talking us and inviting you to join in with us. So, yeah.
With that in mind, because this is a new podcast and we are just ordinary people, we thought the best way to introduce ourselves as readers is to talk about our reading life, some of the books that we've liked and haven't liked, just to give you an idea of our history with books and what we value and maybe some of the things we don't.
Right.
So I'm going to ask Julia a question. Are you ready for this?
I hope so.
Okay. How would you describe your reading life in 3 words? They don't have to be adjectives or adverbs, just 3 words that describe how you're experiencing reading right now.
Yeah. So I think definitely since we've started kind of thinking about this script a little bit, my 3 words have changed all over the place. But I think the 3 that I've settled on at this point are intentional, escapist, and collector. And I'll kind of go over those here. Intentional. Though I don't DNF things, and I often will get myself into situations where I should have DNF'd, I'm very intentional about choosing books that I am not wishy-washy about. So even if it's a book that I should have DNF'd, it's a book that I wanted to read and will probably see it through. So I'm intentional in that regard. But I'm also intentional because I put a no-buy ban on myself the past 1.5 years, specifically for books, among other things. But for books, both to save space, because my husband and I currently live in this teeny tiny little thing with barely enough space to think your own thoughts. So it was just kind of a way to save space. So intentional, but then through the not buying books, but also in that I'm intentionally working through my physical TBR list. So every book that I have at my house that I have not read, I'm intentionally working through reading before I buy anything else or read anything new.
No, I'm only laughing because I absolutely could not do that.
This is the biggest exercise in discipline I've ever had in my whole life. But I'm enjoying it because a lot of these books I never would have read if I kept buying new things, and I'm enjoying what they are.
Okay.
But I'm excited to buy new books. My book wish list is quite long. The second word is escapist. This year has been very difficult for me in my personal life. And as I've been kind of reading and kind of living through what this year has been, I've just wanted a good escape. So over the summer, while some of these personal things were happening, I just kept hearing myself say, I want a grand adventure kind of story. I want something that'll just sweep me into whatever the story is and take me away and just be a little bit of escape. So I love good world building, stuff that really feels like I'm traveling into another world. I think you had said a phrase a while ago, Mom, I'm just a traveler at heart. And that's why I like escapist books. And that's so true. I love to travel. And I think the ability to travel in another book to another place with other characters is something that I'm right now just really enjoying.
Right. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. My third word is collector. And that's for a couple of reasons. And that feels so funny against just having said I'm intentionally not buying books. But I'm a collector because I feel this awful urge right now to buy books from my childhood that I don't have. So whether it's my own copies of the Percy Jackson books, or my own copies of the Chronicles of Narnia, or my own copies of Inkheart, or Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet, like my own copies of stuff.
That you can revisit whenever you want to. Yeah.
Yes, and to keep on my shelf for my kids or whenever I'm feeling like it. But I also like to collect old books at at antique stores. So I have quite a collection at home of books dating back to the 1800s of like my Vanity Fair copy is from 1870, I think. So
very cool.
Yeah. So I love collecting books that I know at antique stores that have a ton of history to them. So what about you, Mom?
Well, I'm going to start with a word that you've already stated, and that is escape. I am definitely using my reading to travel to other places. And I think that's been true ever since the pandemic and the lockdown. I have definitely felt like I wanted to go someplace else. Sometimes those other places aren't any better.
Right.
But they are different.
Yeah.
My reading generally is for entertainment and escape. I also read for knowledge, to learn things, but that is not my driving factor. So escape is my number one word. My second word is abundance. I just feel like I am living at a time in my life where I have access to so many different books, whether it's through the library. I just got a new library card. And because I work at a college, I have access to that library. And both libraries have online catalogs, ebooks and audiobooks. And I'm a huge audiobook listener. So I just feel like I have so many choices. And that kind of rolls into my third word, which is mood. And I am a hardcore mood reader. I try to make TBRs. And in case you don't know what a TBR is, it just is a to be read list or pile. And I did that this past summer. I picked out several books that I really was excited about and I really wanted to read. And I think I read 2 books from that pile. Because I get distracted by new shiny things or old shiny things, or somebody talks about a book and I think that sounds good, or maybe I'm not in the mood for a mystery or a romance or whatever. So my reading life is very much dictated by what I'm feeling in the moment. So those are my 3 words: escape, abundance, and mood.
Okay, so Mom, our next question is related to favorite books. So can you identify a favorite fiction and a favorite nonfiction book?
Sure. Before I answer the question, though, I'm going to just say that I do not have a favorite book of all time. I have too many darlings for that. And I just think it's cruel to make a person choose. So what I'm going to do is pick a book that I've loved that I read this year. And it is The River by Peter Heller. And this book has everything that I love in a reading experience. The writing is stellar. The nature writing in particular is just gorgeous. You can tell that the author spends a lot of time in nature. You can also tell that he's an outdoor person, that he does fly fishing, that he camps, that he kayaks. And this book is based in Maine, in the woods, and it's about 2 young adult males. They're college age, best friends, and they plan this big trip, this big canoeing trip in the lakes in Maine. And I don't know specifically if they're based on real places or not. I never investigated. But while they're doing this while they're doing this canoeing and camping trip, they come across what could possibly have been a murder. And once that happens, then there's all this suspense. It becomes this survival story. There's a forest fire. There's some very weird people hanging around where they are that are unrelated to the murder.
Sure.
But it's just gorgeous and very suspenseful, very captivating. The friendship between the 2 young men is beautiful. The characters are complex. They're nuanced. The resolution is incredible. And I just loved it. So that is The River by Peter Heller. And then the nonfiction book I want to talk about is also about boys in a boat. So it's a theme. It's not generally a theme for me, but it just worked out this way. But the nonfiction book I like is called The Boys in the Boat. And it is by Daniel James Brown. And it is the true story of a rowing team in the 1930s who went to the Olympics and became the gold medal champions. And even though when you start the book, you know what the outcome is, the author writes such a compelling story and you care so much about the characters that it doesn't matter that you know what the ending is going to be. I just loved it. Narrative nonfiction is probably my favorite type of nonfiction, or one of my 2 or 3 favorites. So those are 2 books that I would highly, highly recommend. What about you? What's your favorite fiction? No, not what is your favorite fiction. What is a favorite fiction book?
Well, it's funny, as you were talking about how you can't pick, I I was thinking how easy it is for me to pick because, I mean, the word favorite, it's like saying you have a favorite friend, right? Of like, there's somebody that you go to all of the time. And there are lots of books that I love, much like there's lots of friends that I love, but there's one or two people that I will go to all of the time. And so a favorite book for me is because it's either invoked this sense of, I don't like to use the word intimacy here, but it's a different sense of reading it than like something else. So for me, picking a favorite book is a little bit easier when I look at it in that criteria. So the one that fits that for me is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. This has been my favorite for years. And I mean, the movie is one that I could rewatch all of the time and never get tired of. But I don't know what it is. Like when you think about the Jane Eyre story.
Yeah.
Jane is treated awful. So why do I like this story so much?
From everybody. Even Mr. Rochester treats her despicably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody. I mean, sweet. Is it Adele? The sweet little girl. She just loves
and the
housekeeper.
Jane.
Yeah. But it's a really sad story with, I don't use fun here because it's fun, but a fun mystery in the context of the
kind
story.
Kind of a gothic element.
Yeah. But I think the reason that I always clung to this story was because even though it's dark, Jane herself is very hopeful. And she's very determined to not let her circumstances be her identity.
Yeah.
And there are just some really beautiful quotes in that book. I mean, the one of, there's a proposal scene in this story, and she says something along the lines of, I am no bird and no net ensnares me. I'm a human being with an independent will. And that is just a quote that I have just always kind of really resonated with. And I didn't quote it right, but the premise is there. So that, I love it. My copy of Jane Eyre has things underlined and flowers in it, and I don't think it's a book that will ever not be in my top favorites.
Right. And she has such a strong internal compass.
Yes.
She knows herself and she is true to herself.
Yes.
Even when it requires a great deal of sacrifice.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she treats everybody well.
Yeah.
So like when she has to go back home after her very unkind aunt passes, she's still able to treat those in that family with grace and
even
compassion.
though they're ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I think I've always just found Jane to be an incredibly redeeming character.
Yes. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. My nonfiction piece, there's several that I could pick for this. But I think the book that I want to pick is From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty.
Okay.
And she is a mortician. And this book I just found to be incredibly enlightening because it's her story of going to different countries around the world and looking at their funeral practices. Yeah. Some of the ones that she describes in the book I just found to be incredibly beautiful. And I took a philosophy class in college titled Death and Dying.
Yes.
So it was the philosophy of death and how we, specifically here in Western cultures, work within that and understand that. So reading this book, From Here to Eternity, and following Caitlin online as well, has encouraged me to really reevaluate how I understand death and what would it mean for me to die, or what should grieving look like, but how are there certain practices that make that grieving more joyful versus somber, and I just found it to be really thought
provoking.
Thank you, that's the word I was looking for. Thought provoking book. Yeah. Yep. So those are my two.
Okay, now we're gonna maybe get a little bit spicier. Yeah. Just tell us about one book that was not your cup of tea, that you didn't care for. And this would be a book that you read all the way through, not a book that you started and realized it wasn't going to be for you and you put aside. This is a book that you read in entirety, even if you hate read at the end. Tell us about it.
Oh, I will. So this is a book that I know is a fan favorite. I know the TV show was a fan favorite. It wasn't for me. And this is the All Souls Trilogy by Deborah Harkness. So this includes Discovery of Witches, Soul of Night, or whatever her other books are called.
In the trilogy.
In the trilogy, yeah. And this is a book that a friend recommended it to me to begin with. It's a fantasy story. It has to do with magic and witches and magical creatures. So there's demons and vampires and stuff like up my alley. I was a fan of Harry Potter growing up.
Right,
and
you're a big fantasy reader.
Yeah. However, the first book, though I will admit that Deborah Harkness does a good job of writing atmosphere. The first book is set in, I believe it's Oxford, around leading into October. So she does really good with foggy mornings and falling leaves. Like, she writes it really well. Mm-hmm. But the characters that she wrote, I found were not dynamic at all. I found that they exhibited no character growth throughout the entire series. I found her writing to be kind of dry in terms of how people interacted with each other. I will say the second book is set in Tudor England around, I mean, Queen Elizabeth even makes an appearance in the second book, and that's one of my favorite time periods to read historical fiction. So I think that second book might have been my favorite simply for the atmosphere. I couldn't stand the story by the time I got there. But I think one of the things that really frustrated me, there's two. Firstly, there were definite passages within these books where you're reading it, you're getting through it, and about 2 pages later, you realize, oh, that was supposed to be a climactic scene. That was supposed to be a scene with a lot of energy. There was supposed to be something propelling me to keep reading. And there was none of that energy present. And so, as I'm reading scenes that are supposed to be like fight scenes or whatever, there was none of that energy. And so it didn't, for me as a reader, it didn't give me any reason to keep being interested in what was going on, because there was that ebb and flow of emotion that's supposed to be present in a good story wasn't there.
No propulsion.
Yeah. The second thing that kind of annoyed me is Matthew Claremont, who is the vampire in the story, who is the love interest, kind of the main male character, is kind of tagged as not the most powerful vampire, but like one of those characters where he's quiet but powerful, and everybody kind of knows that he's the quiet, powerful type, and they know what he's capable of, so they don't mess with him. That's stated a lot throughout the book, but at no point through the series do you ever see it played out in a way that makes sense of how it's described. So there's a lot of scenes where he's fighting people, but you get no understanding that he's the most powerful vampire fighting them.
Right.
And so it just created a lot of tension in who his character was versus who he's described to be.
Right.
So I read the series. I wish I didn't, but I did. And, I mean, the first one ends great for Halloween, and I think that that's why I fell into the trap of getting the others.
Yeah.
But I'm not interested in watching the TV show. I'm not really going to recommend this book to anybody else. I did it. I'm done. I don't need to think about it anymore. But I do know it's a fan favorite online and in other places as well. And I think this is maybe why I don't tend to read trending books.
I think, too, when a friend recommends a book, there is I hate to say a sense of obligation, but you do want to honor your friend. Plus, you want to see what they're interested in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's a fantasy book, chances are I'm going to like it, so I'll give it a shot.
You're going to be on board for that.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Mom?
The book I did not like, and I really disliked it, is a very recently published book. It was published at the beginning of this year. It was very hyped, and I do know that it is pretty beloved, at least on BookTube. And if you don't know what BookTube is, it's a
dangerous place.
I spend probably too much time there recently, but it is a community of content creators within YouTube that focus solely on books. This book should have been one that I loved because it's a murder mystery and it's on the cozy side, and I love a cozy murder mystery as a palate cleanser between heavier books. But this one just did not work for me, and that is The Maid by Nita Prose. I listened to this book on audio, and I think it's the reason that I stuck with it because the narrator was excellent. She was really good. The narrator is Lauren Ambrose. She did a great job. The book is problematic in a number of different ways. In the beginning, there were things that were bothering me, but they weren't enough to make me stop reading because I was interested enough in the story. But the longer the story went on, the more issues I was having. And then the epilogue made me want to throw the book across the room. The plot of the story is there is a maid, and she's the main character. She's the protagonist. And it's suggested that she is on the spectrum or somehow is, I don't know how to say it. She's just socially...
neurodivergent.
Thank you. Yes. That's the word I was looking for. Yes. It was just not coming to my brain. But she's not consistently that. I felt like her particular issues changed to suit the plot and the situation. And I found that to be very frustrating. I hate when an author abuses their character to make the story happen. I want an author to create a character and then the character have integrity. And I don't mean integrity like outwardly. I mean integrity and personality. Yeah. So I had a lot of issues with that throughout. I also had the characters are very flat. Like the secondary characters incredibly flat and very stereotypical, which I have trouble with that too. But then the ending in a murder mystery, especially a cozy, you should be able to follow along and figure out who did it. Don't expect to play along with this mystery because you're not going to be able to do it. Yeah. There's a court scene that is utterly ridiculous. I had many issues. I'm happy that people enjoyed it, that they liked it. I don't understand why. But if you like The Maid, any listeners, that is perfectly okay with me, but it was not my book. Yeah. And I wanted to throw it in the trash can.
So I was actually thinking about this last night because this is my field of work. So I think a lot about like how are people within those communities being portrayed. Right. Not that it's my job to consider that, but if somebody within a community is saying one thing, it's important that I listen to that, right? Yeah. So as you were talking about this book, I was reminded of House Rules by Jodi Picoult and in how that character is definitively, does have Asperger's. Now that was written before it's become ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. But I remember that book, there's a note at the end where Jodi Picoult writes explicitly about how many people she talked to make sure that she got the information to portray a character in the way that made sense with the diagnosis that she was looking to use. Right. And so though I haven't read The Maid, and I'm not sure I'm going to, just simply based on your comments, I just kind of think of those two books, and it almost feels like one might be a better representation than the other.
I mean, I can think of another one, too, where I felt like the character, her character integrity remained intact for the entire story. There was growth. You could see her making progress, because not only did she have social interaction issues, she was abused and significantly as a child and suffered horrible trauma. And I think post-traumatic stress syndrome on top of it. And that is Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I felt like the author handled her disabilities very, very well. I felt like in The Maid, Molly, the main character, she's disabled to make the mystery work. And not only that, but her disability has to change throughout the story to make the mystery work. But not change in a way that there's growth, but just randomly to fit the situation. It just drove me absolutely bonkers.
She sounds like a woke character instead of a real character.
Well, I don't even know. Well, but I just couldn't do it. I was so frustrated. And then the ending, I don't want to say anything else about the ending. The epilogue, I wanted to scream. So that was my least favorite. It's my least favorite book of the year. I've had some books I've DNF'd that I wasn't enjoying, but I didn't read the whole thing, so I can't speak to the full experience.
Sure. Yeah. No, The Maid is definitely not one I think I will ever read based on your comments.
No,
so
I don't recommend it at all. Yeah. And I don't think that you would enjoy it. Knowing your profession, it would probably just drive you crazy.
I probably would chuck it out a window unapologetically.
I mean, I never hate read. If I'm not enjoying a book, I put it down. But this one, I felt like at the end, I was murderous.
Yikes, Mom.
Okay, so the final question. What are your two favorite genres that you enjoy reading?
Yeah, I think so far my comments up until this point have kind of given them away. Yeah. So I love fantasy, specifically fantasy that is good world building. So like fantasy like Ella Enchanted or any of Gail Carson Levine's books. I read quite a few of hers while I was growing up. Harry Potter. Yes. Or The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Mayer, which is just a fantabulously science fiction fantasy story.
Yeah. Well, even Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson.
Yeah. There Chronicles are just so many.
Of Narnia.
Right. Yeah. I think that just goes hand in hand with my wanting to use reading as an escape, and I think fantasy you can kind of do that the most. because you really are being transported to another place. And I think that maybe that's why I'm so particular about my world building, because if I want to go someplace, I want it to be really thought through.
I just want to clarify though, you don't really read the big epic adult fantasies. Like,
no, I'm not going to read Game of Thrones.
Right, or like, Brandon Sanderson's world. He had, I mean, there's just the writers who have 18 books. Right. And their trilogies are all connected. That's not the type of fantasy you're talking about. No. You're talking about more like fairy tale.
Yes, definitely. Yes. Fairy tales and magic.
Myth and legend.
Yeah. I mean, I love a good epic every now and then, but it's not something that I'm not gonna read all of the time. Yeah. I like the magic kind of stuff. Okay. My second genre is historical fiction. Now I have periods of time that I like to read from the most. So Tudor England, Renaissance England I also kind of like books set around the French Revolution in France as well. Those are fun for like spy or mystery, because that's a lot of what was going on at the time. Yeah. Now, I will say I like my historical fiction like I like my historical fiction shows, and that if they're about a specific event or a specific person, I want them to be historically accurate. Yeah. Now, if they're ancillary characters, that's fine if it's, just kind of filling in blanks. But like the TV show Reign on Netflix, that is just kind of more teenage angst drama stuff. I don't want stuff like that. Yeah. I want stuff that's pretty legit. So that's kind of, I guess, for all of my historical fiction stuff. Because I know that it actually happened somewhere, so I don't want it to feel like somebody's just imagining too much of what it actually was. What about you, Mom?
I'm going to say historical fiction, too. I really enjoy historical fiction, and I don't read YA very, very often because I also can't handle the angsty drama, especially relationship angsty drama. But I have had really good luck with YA historical fiction. Codename Verity, is a great book, and that is absolutely YA. But there's too much serious stuff going on for it to be angsty. Yeah. Most of my historical fiction is adult fiction, though. Yeah. My second genre is probably murder mystery. And I read some cozy murder mysteries, but I just like straight up murder mystery. And I like playing along and trying to figure out what's going on. But the main reason I like murder mystery is I like getting behind why. Like, why was this murder committed, or what is behind this mystery? So, and that encompasses, like, the mystery part of it can even be spooky, scary, creepy, gothic. It doesn't have to be murder mystery related. It could be related to something that happened in the past, right? And now we have a ghost that's haunting a house. That type of thing. I just really like mystery. Yeah. But I read very widely. I read graphic novels. I've found a manga I like. I like science fiction, romance. I was looking through my Goodreads account. I've read 10 romance books this year, and 5 of them I would consider 4-star or better. Oh, wow. So I do read fairly widely, like nonfiction, like literary fiction. So
yeah, I mean, if I really look at my bookcase, things are probably shuffled up pretty good and are pretty eclectic. But I think the stuff that I do gravitate towards are that fantasy fairy tale stuff and the history stuff.
Which makes sense because escape is one of your 3 words. Yeah. We're going to close every podcast just by talking about what we've recently read, what we're currently reading, and what we're hoping to read next. Yes. On my part, I can't guarantee whatever I say is actually what's going to happen. Yeah. Because what I'm feeling like reading now may not be what I actually pick up next. So just take what I'm saying as far as future reads with a grain of salt.
Yes. A solid estimation. Right. Well, Mom, why don't you give us
the book that I just finished reading? The book I just finished is Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. I think it was written in 1956, but I didn't check the publication date. I do know it was written in the 1950s. It is a science fiction kind of creepy book, and it is definitely filled with dread. There's a real sense of claustrophobia. It's just the story of aliens, I guess I'm going to say aliens, coming to Earth in these pods and taking over the bodies of the people in this town.
Ew.
But the people look exactly the same. So what is happening is their loved ones they see the person and they know they're acting the way they should, but it's not their person. And so they're going to the doctor and saying, am I going crazy because I don't think my dad is my dad, or I don't think my husband is my husband, or whatever. Yeah. And the book is this doctor, he's the main character, trying to figure out what's going on. And then once he knows, trying to do something about it. So it was a great, creepy read right over Halloween. I'm looking forward to watching at least one of the movies that were made based on the book. The original movie is a cult classic right now. Yeah. And I just think it would be fun to watch. So that is the book that I just finished reading.
Okay, so then what...
Well, what about you? What did you finish reading?
Yeah, I finished... So I've read Garlic and the Vampire yesterday.
Oh, it's so adorable.
Which I just have to include because if I don't, somebody's going to miss out reading it, and I feel like they need to. So Garlic and the Vampire is an adorable, sweet, short little graphic novel. Perfect for fall. And the main character, Garlic, is just the most adorable, lovable little character in the whole wide world.
She's a clove of garlic.
Yes, she is. Yes, her head is just this, it's fabulous.
So cute.
And I found myself halfway through realizing I was smiling and I had to put my face back to normal. Super cute. So the longer form book that I finished was For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten.
Yes.
I finished this one right around Halloween, and I did do some immersion, is that what we call it? Immersion reading, where you use like ambient sounds and things to enhance your reading. I started doing that a while ago while I was reading, just because I thought it was fun and was helping, set the feel. But For the Wolf was perfect for this for Halloween because I could put on like creepy forest sounds, and it just enhanced kind of the feel of the Wilderwood, which is this haunted forest in the book. So though I have some thoughts on the story itself, and I probably won't read the rest of the series, I think it was the perfect note to end on right before Halloween. So that's the one that I just finished. What are you currently reading?
I am currently reading West with Giraffes, and I am going to be reading it on audio. I'm going to be listening to it on audio, but I started reading it first. I actually have an ebook and the audio version of it. It's by Linda Rutledge, and it's a fiction book based on a real occurrence. In the 1930s. There was a big hurricane. I think it was 1938. There was a big hurricane that hit the East Coast, and there was a ship coming from Africa that came through that hurricane carrying two giraffes. And the giraffes came into New York, and then they traveled across country to California. And the story is about that whole adventure. And it's told through the experience of a young 17-year-old guy. Now, I've just barely gotten started, but I get the impression that he's going to follow them the whole way. He's an orphan. He came from the Midwest, from the Dust Bowl. His whole family died. He's pretty much aimless and purposeless. And he comes to New York because he has a cousin that lives there, and the cousin dies in the hurricane. And so he's alone again, and I think he's going to follow the giraffes across country. So I'm really looking forward to that. It also fulfills a prompt for a reading challenge I'm doing this year. So I'm getting it out of the way early in November so I can read what I want to
but
the rest of the month.
Yeah, it sounds like a good heartwarmer kind of story.
I think that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, too, is it's told from the perspective of this young guy when he's 105 years old. So you get this whole other perspective of him being a very elderly man in a nursing care facility. So, it's good.
No, that sounds sweet. It sounds like a book that would make me cry at the end.
I have a feeling that probably is going to happen. Yeah. So what about you? What are you reading right now?
So I started yesterday The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. And I have never read Dracula, much to my greatest failings.
You need to. You absolutely need to.
It's on my read list for next Halloween. Yeah. Same with Jekyll and Hyde, which surprisingly Ben has a copy of that I didn't even know he had. So that's going in there too.
That's a book I've never read either.
Yeah. But The Historian, as far as I understand, is about Dracula and Vlad the Impaler and kind of history around understanding who that person was and how that legend came to be. It's supposed to be, I think you called it unsettling, Mom?
Yeah, it's unsettling, and it's another book that has this like low-level sense of dread the whole way through. Yeah. So I'm excited for this one. I have mapped out the entire month of November to read this, simply because it's a larger book. I think it's one of the larger I've read this year so far. And from what I've read so far, the writing is not writing that I'm going to be able to read chapters at a time. It's much more reflective and detail-oriented than, say, For the Wolf. Right. Oh, definitely. It's denser.
Yeah, there's a lot more. You can tell that it's written to be like a letter to the reader instead of a first-person action-packed kind of experience. So yeah, that's the one that I'm in the mid. I'm reading, but I literally am only like 20 pages in. So I'm excited for that. And then what are you looking to read next?
I honestly don't know. I have a book called The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which is supposed to be a cozy witch school book. And it sounds like fun. I didn't read it before Halloween, but I think it would be fine for November. I also have Mrs. Westaway, The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware.
Okay.
That's from the library. I have 2 weeks yet to finish reading that. So I might pick that up just to have it complete before I take it back to the library. I also have a nonfiction book called Laundry Love.
Oh?
That I'm thinking about reading. It's about laundry.
Oh, it sounds like it.
But it's a very comedic, very lighthearted approach to laundry by a man who has made fabric and cleaning it his whole life. So,
okay, interesting.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get to that, and I think it's going to be really good.
Yeah. Sounds like fun.
What about you?
So last night I pulled together. So I've been building my TBRs based on seasons of the year because I'm a seasonal reader. So I had a series of books that I wanted to read during the fall leading into Halloween and through to November. There were some books that I was trying to read during the summer. So I've pulled my winter books together. And there are some bigger books and some others. But I think the book at the top of the pile that I'll probably grab first is The Devil in White City by Erik Larson. That one sounds like a lot of fun. And it sounds like it's supposed to be a Victorian time period at the time of Chicago Fair.
Yes. It's like the turn of the century, I think. Yeah.
With a murder mystery. So it sounds like it's going to be dramatic and gothic and perfect for the beginning of our winter season here. So I'm excited for that one.
Yeah, I think that'll be good.
Now, that's not to say that Christmas books might not be thrown into that pile come Christmas time, but this will probably be the book that I will read after The Historian.
Okay, well, that's all we have for today. I think we talked a little bit longer than we were planning on, but it's fun. We get talking about books and we can't stop.
Clearly, this is why we have a podcast. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We hope you've enjoyed listening to this cozy conversation as much as we've enjoyed having it. We'll be back in 2 weeks with our next chapter, and you can find us anywhere podcasts can be found. Our website specifically is the booksnugpodcast.buzzsprout.com.
Yes.
Whew. You can also join in the conversation with us on Instagram at the booksnug_podcast.
Yes.
And we'll have a Facebook page up and running shortly as soon as Meta decides to cooperate with us.
As C.S. Lewis, one of our favorite authors, so famously said, "You can never have a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me." And we wholeheartedly agree.